The easiest person to underestimate is often the one carrying the greatest secret. The sound of polished dress shoes echoed across the marble lobby just as the revolving doors welcomed another busy Monday morning into Whitmore Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. Employees hurried past with laptops tucked beneath their arms, fresh coffee balanced carefully in their hands, and anxious eyes fixed on another demanding week. Hidden among them, wearing a neatly pressed Navy janitor's uniform and quietly pushing a cleaning cart across the gleaming floor, was Nathan Brooks. Most people never noticed him. The ones who did rarely looked twice. To them, he was simply the quiet single dad who emptied trash cans before sunrise, polished conference rooms after everyone had gone home, and always greeted people with the same calm smile that asked for nothing in return. Nathan believed dignity didn't need an audience. It only needed consistency. His work was nearly finished when the glass doors to the executive elevators slid open with a soft chime. Claire Whitmore stepped into the lobby, surrounded by senior executives moving almost in perfect formation behind her. At only 36, she had built a reputation as one of the youngest CEOs in the country to transform a struggling company into a Wall Street success story. Sharp. Brilliant. Demanding. Every decision she made was expected to be fast, confident, and unquestioned. As she crossed the lobby, her assistant leaned close and whispered about investors arriving within minutes. Claire's pace quickened. At that exact moment, a young intern rushing toward the elevators accidentally bumped into Nathan's cleaning cart. A cup of coffee tipped over, splashing across the polished floor only a few feet from Claire's expensive heels. The lobby froze. Nobody spoke. Nathan immediately reached for a towel. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, even though everyone had seen the accident wasn't his fault. Claire looked at the spreading stain, then at the janitor kneeling calmly to clean it. "This is exactly the kind of carelessness this company cannot afford," she said, her voice carrying through the silent lobby. Nathan slowly stood. "Ma'am, the intern, enough." She cut him off without raising her voice. Somehow, that made the moment feel colder. "Collect your things. You're finished here." A stunned silence settled over the room. The intern opened his mouth, wanting to explain, but fear kept him motionless. Several employees lowered their eyes. Nathan looked at Claire for only a brief second before giving a respectful nod. "I understand," he replied. There was no anger in his voice. No pleading. No argument. He removed the company name badge from his uniform, placed it gently on the reception counter, thanked the security guard who had always shared morning conversations with him, and quietly walked toward the revolving doors carrying nothing but a small cardboard box containing family photos, a worn coffee mug decorated by his daughter, and a faded blue jacket. No one followed him. No one knew they had just watched the wealthiest shareholder in the room leave the building without saying a single word. As the revolving door completed one final turn behind him, Claire's executive assistant's phone suddenly rang. Her face drained of color before she slowly looked toward the boardroom upstairs. "Ma'am," she whispered nervously, "the chairman says the investor who just acquired controlling interest in Whitmore Dynamics has arrived." Nathan Brooks drove home in an aging white pickup that rattled gently whenever it climbed the steep hills outside Cedar Ridge. The cardboard box rested quietly on the passenger seat beside him, its contents shifting slightly each time the truck rolled over a crack in the road. He did not replay the humiliation inside the company lobby. He did not rehearse the words he wished he had said. Instead, he watched the golden afternoon sunlight stretch across the open fields, reminding himself that peace was often a choice long before it became a feeling. 20 minutes later he turned into a modest neighborhood where children rode bicycles beneath tall maple trees and neighbors still waved from front porches. His small blue house looked exactly as it had every evening for the past 7 years, simple, clean, and filled with memories money could never replace. Before he even reached the front door, it swung open. 12-year-old Lily Brooks ran outside with a bright smile that could soften almost any difficult day. She wrapped both arms around her father without asking a single question. She simply knew when he needed the hug more than the explanation. Nathan smiled and kissed the top of her head. "How was school?" he asked gently. "Pretty good," Lily answered. "How was work?" Nathan paused for only a heartbeat before answering honestly. "Today was my last day." Lily looked up into his eyes. "Did something bad happen?" He smiled again, the same calm smile that had carried him through years of loss and quiet perseverance. "Sometimes one door closes before another one opens." She nodded thoughtfully. "Does that mean we will still have spaghetti tonight?" Nathan laughed softly. "Absolutely. Some things are too important to change." As the pasta simmered on the stove and fresh bread warmed inside the oven, the little house filled with familiar smells that reminded Nathan why he had chosen a quieter life. Family photographs covered one kitchen wall. Most included Lily at different ages, always smiling beside the same patient father. Only one framed picture showed another face, his late wife, Emily, laughing beneath the summer sky years before illness had taken her away. Nathan glanced at the photograph for a brief moment before returning to the dinner table. After they finished eating, Lily disappeared upstairs to finish homework while Nathan carried 2 coffee mugs into a small room behind the garage. Anyone expecting a luxurious office would have been disappointed. There were no marble floors, no expensive artwork, and no oversized executive desk. Instead, 6 computer monitors illuminated the quiet room with a soft blue glow. Financial reports, international market charts, and secure investment dashboards filled every screen. Nathan removed the worn work jacket he had carried home from the company and carefully hung it beside the door. Then he sat down, unlocked an encrypted terminal, and calmly reviewed documents worth billions of dollars. A video conference request appeared. Within seconds, the faces of experienced attorneys and senior financial advisors filled the monitors. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," one of them said respectfully. "The final acquisition documents are ready for your approval. Once you sign, the transfer of controlling interest becomes official before tomorrow morning's board meeting." Nathan remained silent for a moment, studying the digital signature waiting at the bottom of the agreement. Finally, he reached for the mouse. "Proceed," he said quietly. "But remember one thing. We are not buying a company. We are protecting the people who depend on it." The room fell silent. Every advisor understood that those words explained Nathan Brooks far better than any balance sheet ever could. The following morning, Whitmore Dynamics no longer felt like the company Claire Whitmore had confidently walked into only 24 hours earlier. The bright lobby still reflected the early sunlight pouring through the towering glass walls, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations that normally filled the elevators with confident optimism had been replaced by nervous whispers. Financial news flashed across televisions mounted inside the reception area. Analysts spoke carefully, repeating the same unexpected headline. An anonymous investment group had completed the purchase of a controlling interest in Whitmore Dynamics overnight. No journalist knew the identity of the buyer. No executive had received advance notice. Even the board members appeared caught completely off guard. Claire stepped out of the executive elevator with determined confidence, refusing to allow uncertainty to appear on her face. She had spent years convincing investors that leadership required calm under pressure, and she intended to live by that principle now. Her assistant hurried beside her, balancing a tablet filled with overnight reports. 3 major partners have requested emergency meetings," she said quietly. "The stock recovered after the acquisition announcement, but everyone wants answers." Claire nodded once. "Then we give them answers." Inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere felt unusually heavy. Members of the board sat quietly around the polished walnut table, exchanging cautious glances instead of their usual confident greetings. Even Richard Halston, the chairman whose calm rarely faltered, appeared unusually thoughtful. Claire placed her presentation folder on the table. "I understand everyone has questions," she began. "Whatever this investor's intentions may be, we will continue operating as planned." Before anyone could respond, the corporate secretary entered carrying a sealed envelope marked confidential. She handed it directly to the chairman. Richard slowly opened the document, adjusted his glasses, and silently read the first page. His expression changed almost immediately. The confidence in his eyes gave way to genuine surprise. One director leaned forward. "Richard?" The chairman looked around the room before speaking. "The acquisition has already been finalized. The new majority owner has requested a special board session this morning." Several executives exchanged anxious looks. Claire remained composed, although a quiet tension settled behind her steady expression. "Who is it?" she asked. Richard lowered the papers onto the table. "The identity remains sealed until the meeting officially begins." Silence settled across the room like a gathering storm. Downstairs, employees gathered in small groups near coffee stations, trying to understand what was happening. Some worried about layoffs. Others feared another corporate merger that would erase years of hard work. One young intern stared toward the empty corner where Nathan's cleaning cart usually stood each morning. "It feels strange," he whispered. "He was always here before everyone else." An older maintenance supervisor sighed softly. "Sometimes the people keeping a place together are the ones nobody notices until they are gone." Miles away, Nathan finished pouring orange juice into Lily's glass before driving her to school. She smiled as she climbed out of the truck. "Have a good meeting today, Dad." Nathan smiled warmly. "I will. You have a good day too." As she disappeared through the school entrance, Nathan remained parked for another moment, watching children laugh beneath the American flag waving gently above the building. Only after she was safely inside did he straighten his tie, place a simple leather folder on the passenger seat, and quietly begin the drive back toward the company where everyone believed they already knew exactly who he was. The boardroom overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows, but no one admired the view that morning. Every chair around the long walnut table was occupied, every notebook lay open, and every executive waited for the unknown owner whose name had already become the biggest story on Wall Street. The quiet hum of the air conditioning was the only sound until Richard Halston folded his hands and spoke with unusual gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, before our guest arrives, there is something you should understand. This acquisition was neither hostile nor reckless. It was carefully planned over several years through a network of private investment partnerships. Every purchase followed federal regulations. Every transaction was transparent. Whoever accomplished this understood our company better than many people sitting in this room." Claire listened without moving. She had spent the previous evening reviewing every possible competitor capable of buying Whitmore Dynamics. None of the names fit. The investment strategy was too patient, too disciplined, almost invisible. One board member leaned forward. "How does someone quietly accumulate this much ownership without attracting attention?" Richard answered calmly. "By never seeking attention." Those words lingered in the room. At that same moment, several miles away, Nathan parked beneath a row of maple trees instead of using the executive garage. He stepped out wearing a well-tailored charcoal suit that had remained untouched inside his closet for years. There was nothing flashy about it. No expensive watch, no designer accessories, no attempt to impress anyone. He simply looked like a man who respected the occasion. Before entering the building, he paused long enough to answer a phone call from his chief legal advisor. "Everything is ready, Mr. Brooks," the attorney said. "The board has verified your controlling interest. The media has begun gathering outside." Nathan looked toward the American flag moving gently above the entrance. "Keep the reporters waiting," he replied. "The employees deserve answers before the headlines do." He ended the call and quietly walked toward the front doors. The same security guard who had watched him leave with a cardboard box the previous afternoon immediately stood a little straighter. His eyes widened in surprise as Nathan approached. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Nathan smiled warmly. "Good morning, Frank. How is your grandson doing after his surgery?" Frank blinked, caught off guard that Nathan remembered. "He is doing much better. Thank you for asking." Nathan nodded. "That is wonderful news." He continued through the lobby with the same unhurried steps he had taken every morning as the building's janitor. Several employees noticed him and instinctively smiled before suddenly realizing he was no longer wearing a maintenance uniform. Conversations faded one by one. Coffee cups paused halfway to surprised faces. The young intern responsible for the spilled coffee stared in disbelief. "That is him," he whispered. "That is Mr. Brooks." Nathan acknowledged each familiar face with the same quiet courtesy that had always defined him. He did not enjoy their astonishment. He did not seek revenge in their embarrassment. He simply kept walking toward the executive elevator that had always required a security badge he never possessed. This time, the elevator doors opened before he reached them. Upstairs, a secretary entered the boardroom with a calm but unmistakably nervous expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced softly, "the majority owner has arrived." Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward the closed doors. The polished brass handles moved slowly. Then the doors opened, and Nathan Brooks, the man many people still remembered as yesterday's quiet janitor, stepped into the boardroom carrying nothing more than a simple leather folder, and the same calm dignity that no promotion, no fortune, and no title could ever make greater. Nobody spoke. The silence inside the boardroom felt heavier than any speech that could have filled it. Claire Whitmore remained standing beside her chair, unable to reconcile the image before her with the quiet man she had dismissed less than 24 hours earlier. Nathan Brooks walked to the end of the conference table with the same measured pace he had once used while pushing a janitor's cart through these very hallways. There was no trace of pride on his face. No satisfaction. Only calm. Richard Halston rose first. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said respectfully, "it is my honor to introduce Mr. Nathan Brooks, majority shareholder and chairman of Whitmore Dynamics." Several directors instinctively stood. Others followed a heartbeat later. Claire remained still for only a moment before quietly rising as well. Nathan offered a polite nod. "Please," he said gently. "Sit down. We have important work ahead of us." The directors slowly returned to their seats. Nathan placed his leather folder on the table but did not open it immediately. Instead, his eyes traveled around the room, recognizing familiar faces. The finance director who always greeted him before sunrise. The receptionist who remembered Lily's birthday every year. The maintenance supervisor who once shared homemade cookies during a snowstorm. He remembered them all because he had never believed that titles made people worth noticing. Claire finally broke the silence. "Mr. Brooks," she began carefully, "I believe everyone here deserves an explanation." Nathan met her eyes without hostility. "You are right." His voice remained steady. 7 years ago, after my wife passed away, I sold the technology company I founded. I invested the proceeds through long-term partnerships and stepped away from public business. My daughter needed a father more than the market needed another executive. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Nathan continued, "I accepted a janitorial position because it gave me something most powerful jobs could not. Time. I could drive Lily to school every morning, pick her up every afternoon, attend every school concert, every parent conference, every birthday. That was success to me." The room remained perfectly still. Even the air seemed to pause. Nathan finally opened the leather folder, revealing financial reports and acquisition documents. 6 months ago I learned that Whitmore Dynamics had become the target of an investment group planning aggressive restructuring. Their proposal included closing regional offices, outsourcing hundreds of jobs, and eliminating employee benefits that families depend upon. He allowed those words to settle before continuing. "I could not ignore it." One director leaned forward. "So you purchased the company before they could?" Nathan nodded once. "Not because I wanted another corporation. Because I wanted to protect the people inside it." Claire lowered her eyes toward the polished table. Yesterday she had seen only a janitor. Today she was discovering a man who had quietly sacrificed prestige for fatherhood and fortune for purpose. The realization settled heavily upon her conscience. Nathan closed the folder. "Yesterday, I lost a job. Today, I accepted a responsibility." Those are not the same thing. He looked around the room once more, his expression warm but unwavering. I did not come here to remind anyone of yesterday. I came here to build a better tomorrow. That begins with respect, because every person in this building deserves it, regardless of the name stitched onto a uniform or printed on an office door. No applause followed. None was necessary. The boardroom remained wrapped in complete silence, the kind of silence that only arrives when the truth quietly changes every heart in the room. The silence remained long after Nathan finished speaking. No one rushed to fill it because every person in the room sensed that something far more important than a business transaction had just taken place. Richard Halston slowly closed his notebook and looked around the table. I believe, he said quietly, we have all been reminded that leadership is not measured by titles. It is measured by character. Several directors nodded without saying a word. Claire Whitmore remained seated, her hands folded together, as she replayed every moment from the previous afternoon. She remembered the spilled coffee, the crowded lobby, the frightened intern, and the quiet man who had accepted humiliation without raising his voice. The memory felt different. Now, much heavier. She finally stood. Mr. Brooks, she said softly, before we discuss the future of this company, there is something I need to say. Every eye turned toward her. Claire took a slow breath. Yesterday I judged a man by his uniform instead of his character. I assumed authority gave me the right to make a decision without understanding the truth. I was wrong. Her voice never trembled, but sincerity replaced the confidence that had once sounded untouchable. For that I am truly sorry. Nathan looked at her calmly. He did not rush to answer. Instead, he allowed the weight of her words to settle naturally throughout the room. Finally, he offered a small smile. Thank you, he replied. It takes courage to admit a mistake. More courage than pretending one never happened. Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment before meeting his gaze again. I do not expect forgiveness. Nathan gently shook his head. Forgiveness is not something you earn after enough embarrassment. It is something another person chooses to give. The room grew quiet once more. Nathan walked toward the large windows overlooking the city below. Employees looked like tiny figures moving between buildings, each carrying responsibilities, dreams, and families waiting for them at home. When I cleaned these hallways, he said, I heard conversations people believed no one noticed. I heard worries about medical bills. I heard parents wondering how they would pay college tuition. I heard young employees questioning whether they belonged here. A company is never built by the names on the executive floor alone. It is built every morning by thousands of ordinary people who quietly choose to care. He turned back toward the board. That is why my first decision as chairman is simple. There will be no layoffs connected to this acquisition. Employee benefits will remain protected. We will invest in training, mentorship, and leadership development because people are not expenses on a spreadsheet. They are the reason a spreadsheet exists in the first place. Relief spread across several faces. One director quietly removed his glasses to wipe away unexpected tears. Richard smiled for the first time that morning. Claire listened carefully, realizing that Nathan was not undoing her leadership. He was redefining it. She slowly removed the folder containing her prepared resignation letter and placed it on the table. If stepping aside is best for the company, she said honestly, I am prepared to resign today. Nathan glanced at the unopened envelope but made no move toward it. Please keep it, he answered gently. I did not come here looking for a vacant office. I came here looking for willing hearts. A company can recover from financial mistakes much faster than it can recover from leaders who stop learning. If you are willing to learn, then your work here is not finished. For the first time in many years, Claire felt something unfamiliar replace certainty. It was humility. And in that quiet boardroom, surrounded by people who had witnessed power change hands without revenge, everyone understood they were no longer watching the beginning of a corporate takeover. They were witnessing the beginning of a different kind of leadership. The news traveled through Whitmore Dynamics faster than any official announcement ever could. Employees who had spent years walking past Nathan Brooks without truly seeing him now spoke his name with quiet disbelief. Some remembered how he always stayed late to help the night cleaning crew finish before a snowstorm. Others remembered the mornings he shoveled ice from the front sidewalk before anyone arrived, never waiting for thanks. The receptionist smiled softly as she recalled how he had fixed the office coffee machine one winter morning so everyone could enjoy a warm cup before an important client presentation. Piece by piece, people began sharing stories that revealed the same truth. The quiet man had always been extraordinary. They had simply mistaken humility for ordinary. Later that afternoon, Nathan requested a company-wide gathering inside the main atrium instead of the executive auditorium. He wanted everyone standing on the same floor where they worked together every day. Folding chairs filled the open space. Engineers stood beside accountants. Receptionists stood beside department directors. Maintenance staff stood beside senior managers. For the first time in years, job titles seemed to matter less than the people wearing them. Claire stood near the front, no longer separated by a private stage or reserved seating. Nathan walked onto the small platform carrying only a single sheet of paper. He looked across the crowd with quiet gratitude before speaking. Yesterday many of you watched a janitor leave this building carrying a cardboard box. Today you see the same man standing here with a different responsibility. But I want you to understand something important. My value did not change overnight. Neither did yours. The room became perfectly still. Too often, Nathan continued, we confuse position with purpose. We believe the executive office creates dignity, when real dignity comes from the choices we make every single day. The person cleaning the hallway deserves the same respect as the person presenting quarterly earnings, because both make this company possible. A young software engineer slowly lowered his head. He remembered walking past Nathan hundreds of times without ever learning his name. Nathan smiled gently as though he understood what many people were thinking. Every morning I watched people arrive carrying invisible burdens. Sick parents. Young children. Financial worries. Broken hearts. Yet they still came to work determined to do their best. That is the kind of strength no financial report can measure. Claire felt every sentence settle deeper inside her heart. She realized that while she had studied productivity, Nathan had quietly studied people. While she had measured performance, he had measured kindness. When the gathering ended, employees did not rush back to their desks as they normally would. Instead, many walked toward coworkers they barely knew, introducing themselves, shaking hands, and thanking members of the maintenance and custodial teams who had worked around them for years. The young intern responsible for the spilled coffee finally found the courage to approach Nathan. Mr. Brooks, he said quietly, I should have spoken up yesterday. I was afraid. Nathan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Fear is part of being human, he replied warmly. The important thing is deciding what kind of person you become after fear has passed. The young man nodded with grateful eyes. As afternoon sunlight poured through the towering glass walls, Whitmore Dynamics looked exactly the same from the outside. The logo had not changed. The building had not changed. But inside, something far more valuable had begun to grow. Respect was no longer reserved for those with the biggest offices. It had quietly become part of the company's foundation. Over the weeks that followed, the changes inside Whitmore Dynamics were not announced through glossy advertising campaigns or expensive press conferences. They appeared quietly in ordinary moments. Managers began arriving early to greet their teams by name. Executives occasionally joined custodial staff for breakfast before the workday began. Department meetings opened with gratitude instead of pressure. Little by little, the culture Nathan had imagined began replacing the one that had existed for years. Claire embraced every change without protecting her pride. More than once she walked the building before sunrise, not because anyone expected her to, but because she wanted to understand the company through the eyes of the people who had always kept it running. She spoke with security officers about lonely overnight shifts. She thanked maintenance workers for repairs most employees never noticed. She asked receptionists what visitors experienced during their first 5 minutes inside the building. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she stopped assuming she already knew every answer. One cool Friday morning, she found Nathan quietly replacing a small potted plant near the lobby windows. The same corner where everything had changed only weeks before now looked brighter with fresh green leaves reaching toward the morning sun. Claire smiled gently. "You are still taking care of this place." Nathan looked up with a warm expression. "Some habits are worth keeping." She glanced around the peaceful lobby. "I used to think leadership meant making the biggest decisions." Nathan carefully adjusted the plant before answering. "Sometimes it means noticing the smallest details. People remember how you make them feel much longer than they remember quarterly numbers." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "I spent years trying to build an impressive company." Nathan smiled. "Now you are building an unforgettable one." Their conversation was interrupted by laughter echoing across the lobby. Several employees had gathered around Lily Brooks, who had stopped by after school to surprise her father. She proudly carried a homemade poster decorated with colorful markers. Across the top she had written in large letters, "Kindness is always a good investment." Nathan laughed softly as Lily held it high. "I thought your office needed something cheerful," she said. Claire knelt slightly so she could read every word more closely. "This might be the best business advice anyone has brought into this building," she said with a smile. Lily beamed. "My dad says money can build buildings, but kindness builds people." Claire looked toward Nathan, realizing those simple words explained everything she had struggled to learn throughout her career. A few employees nearby quietly applauded. Not because they had been asked to, but because the little girl had reminded them why they came to work each day. Later that afternoon, Nathan and Claire reviewed reports showing employee satisfaction climbing, customer trust improving, and new partnerships forming faster than expected. The numbers were encouraging, but neither of them celebrated the financial success first. Nathan pointed instead to a report showing record volunteer participation in community service projects sponsored by the company. "This," he said gently, "is the return I hoped for." Claire smiled with genuine admiration. "I used to believe success changed people." Nathan closed the report and looked across the busy office where employees greeted one another with warmth instead of hesitation. "Real success does not change who you are," he replied. "It reveals who you have been all along." As the late afternoon sunlight filled the building with a golden glow, Whitmore Dynamics no longer stood as a monument to ambition alone. It had quietly become a place where respect was practiced, kindness was noticed, and every person who walked through the front doors understood that dignity could never be measured by the title printed on a business card. Nearly 1 year later, the first light of autumn settled gently across the front entrance of Whitmore Dynamics, painting the glass walls with warm shades of gold. Employees arrived carrying coffee cups, backpacks, and conversations that sounded lighter than they had a year before. The company had grown, profits had reached record levels, and industry magazines praised its remarkable turnaround. Yet the achievement people spoke about most was not found on financial statements. It was found in the way everyone greeted one another. Security officers were addressed by name. Receptionists were included in leadership celebrations. Custodians no longer worked as invisible figures after dark. Respect had quietly become part of the building itself. Nathan Brooks walked through the lobby wearing the same simple confidence he had always carried. Although he now served as chairman, he still stopped to straighten a chair left out of place, and still thanked the maintenance team every morning before heading upstairs. Nothing about success had changed the rhythm of his character. Across the lobby, Claire Whitmore watched him for a moment before smiling. She had changed as well. The sharp distance that once surrounded her had been replaced by calm attentiveness. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions before making decisions. Most importantly, she had learned to notice people long before noticing their job titles. "Good morning," she said as Nathan approached. "Good morning," he replied. "Everything ready for today's celebration?" Claire laughed softly. "Only because everyone else did the hard work." Nathan nodded with quiet approval. "That is the sign of good leadership." Moments later, the entire company gathered in the atrium to celebrate the anniversary of a year that had changed far more than ownership. Richard Halston stepped onto the small stage carrying a framed photograph. It showed Nathan during his days as the company's janitor, quietly polishing the same lobby floor where everyone now stood together. Beside it was a recent photograph of him standing with employees from every department during a community volunteer project. Richard smiled warmly. "One picture reminds us where humility lives," he said. "The other reminds us what humility can build." Gentle applause filled the room. Nathan accepted the frame with gratitude before placing it on an easel where everyone could see both photographs side by side. "Please never remove the first picture," he said. "It reminds me that every season of life has value." At that moment, the front doors opened and Lily Brooks hurried inside carrying another handmade poster. She ran straight toward her father before turning to face the crowd with a smile bright enough to make dozens of people laugh. Across the colorful page she had written, "The best companies never forget to be kind." Claire knelt beside her and smiled. "I think we should hang this in the lobby." The employees answered with cheerful applause. Nathan looked around the room at familiar faces that had once hurried past one another without a second glance. Now they looked like neighbors instead of strangers. He realized that the greatest investment he had ever made had never been measured in dollars, shares, or market value. It had been measured in restored dignity, renewed trust, and the quiet decision to believe that every human being deserves respect before recognition. As the gathering ended and employees slowly returned to their work, sunlight poured through the glass walls exactly as it had on the morning everything began. The building looked the same. The city outside looked the same. But the hearts inside had changed forever. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not that one man rises higher than everyone expected. It is that his quiet example gently teaches everyone else to rise with him.